So here's yet another video on this low carb diet debate. It's on this article. It was in the Lancet, August 16th, 2018. Dietary carbohydrate intake and mortality, a prospective cohort and meta-analysis study. There's been a lot of ranting and raving about it. I've done a video on that specifically and why, as human beings, we tend to be very hesitant, in fact, to the point of arguing vehemently with things that don't fit our theories, our pictures of the world. I'm going to, in this video, go through, this is the PDF version of that article, and I'm going to go through some of the details on the study itself. And my perspective is that the science is very good. Well, part of the science is good. The study design, the information provided, and clearly the methods are excellent. As is often the case, I think the problem becomes our interpretation. So let's get into that, but first a brief introduction. My name is Ford Brewer, F-O-R-D, Brewer, B-R-E-W-E-R. I'm a physician, started off as an ER doc. After watching all of the preventable death, disease, and disability that patients bring into the ER, I got very passionate about that. I went to Johns Hopkins to learn preventive medicine and ended up running that program and left and have spent over 3 decades teaching primary care docs, directing primary care docs, working with primary care docs in terms of helping them deliver better prevention. And this is the prevention channel. What I'm doing here is giving you some of the science that I'm continuing to learn and that's continuing to develop out there. Why am I showing this picture again? The 6 blind men and the elephant. Here's the thing. A lot of you are thinking there, Brewer, you go on and on and on and don't, just bottom line it. That term, bottom line it, as a verb, came from my wife, Janice. As you can imagine, living with me has its challenges, just like living with anybody else. She gets really frustrated that I don't, quote, bottom line it. But here's my response. His bottom line was that the elephant's like a spear. His bottom line is that, no, the elephant's a snake. His bottom line was, no, the elephant is a fan, and you know where I'm going with that. Well, I will get as close to a bottom line as I can, but let's do that a little bit later. Let's go through some information first. If I didn't mention this, I'll say this again. I think the methods on this study were excellent, very rigorous, very robust. I don't think this is trashy science. I don't think it's bad science at all. I think it's bringing up a really, really good point. And I will do some bottom lining. I think that it does make the case that there are many situations, especially when we're younger, where the portion of our calories from any type of carb, ranging from broccoli to a lot of other types of carbs, is not that dangerous. However, I will also say, by the time we get insulin resistant, and that's not totally genetic because it doesn't happen to young people nearly as much as it does to old people. Once we get in our 50s and 60s and our body's not responding well to insulin and we have a sugar problem, carbohydrates are a big deal. And you know what? I will bottom line a point. After we go through the details here, you will see this study doesn't deal with that at all. It talks about younger people, people that don't have insulin resistance yet, or at least don't appear to be, and people that clearly don't have cardiovascular disease. So we're talking about 2 different populations here. But let's get into the details. Now, this study, ERIC, was based on the ERIC trial. ERIC is the atherosclerosis in communities atherosclerosis risk in communities trial. They went to 4 different communities, and this started 87 and 89. They went to people in 4 different communities. One in North Carolina, one in Mississippi, one in Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, and another in Maryland. So they went to 4 different communities, and they administered a thing called the PPQ. The FFQ, the Food Frequency Questionnaire. And as I've mentioned in a couple of other videos, the author of that Food Frequency Questionnaire is a fellow named Willett. He's now the chair of nutritional epidemiology at Harvard. And just being the developer of the survey that was used, the questionnaire that was used, is one reason to make him an author of this study. That may have been his only participation. He may have had a lot more. I just don't know. But I don't think that participation makes this bad science. I've seen that stated out there. I don't think that does. As you'll see in there, one of the key focus points, why don't they say portion size quotient? One of the things that I did learn during some of the journal clubs at Hopkins is it's really much more of an issue of frequency. Now, portion size, routine, regular portion size is a big deal. I'm not going to argue that. But when you're looking at makeup of a diet, portions of things, frequency is a much bigger deal. My diet, for example, you've seen it before, and for both lunch and dinner, and usually for breakfast, actually all 3 of my meals. When I eat 3 meals, now I'm back to 2 meals, but every meal I get significant calories from olive oil. So my guess, if I took the FFQ, the Food Frequency Questionnaire, I'd get a huge portion of my calories from olive oil. In fact, I'll go to another point as well. It's over in the results section. I'm not going to go there right now because we've got a lot to cover here. But they did find a subset group where they said, look, there is one group where if you have decreased carbs, but you replace it with plant fats and plant proteins, you do tend to get a continued decrease in risk. I saw that, and that's what I need. And again, if you're looking for spoilers, not in this video, but probably another one on this issue, I'm going to cover that. This is not inconsistent at all with low-carb, plant-based diet. But anyhow, let's go back to this study. They administered the FFQ. When did they administer it? They had multiple visits. These started in 87 through 89. They did them about every 5 years. So you've got about 6 different episodes of doing this questionnaire. Now, what did they look for? Well, age. And the average age of this, or the age range from this group, again, these people started at 15 up to 25 or 30, and then ended at 45, because this is 30 years later, 89 to 2018 or 2017, 2013, that time period. You followed these people for a long time. Here's an interesting point. I'm going to, again, jump to another conclusion. They clearly weighted the original versions, the original information on the original visits, 87 through 89, and they weighted visits 1 through 3. If someone had atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease, they stopped taking their information at that point. So again, no matter what comes out of this, as you see, for those of us who already have cardiovascular issues, atherosclerosis, this information doesn't mean much. Anyhow, let's go back to the study itself. The primary outcome was all-cause mortality subsequent of the first visit until the end of 2013. The number of deaths was, how did they do that? Telephone calls, linkage to local hospital, state mortality records, and the National Death Index. So there were ways that they found that out. Again, I don't think that's bad methodology in terms of science. What did they look for? Well, one of my questions was, do they look for BMI? Because BMI is such a critical part of driving diabetes, insulin resistance, and therefore cardiovascular inflammation and risk. The answer was no. They didn't really look at that. However, they do have some things in there, such as total energy caloric intake, diabetes status or known diabetes status. They looked at cigarette smoking. They looked at physical activity. So they looked at several things, which I think, even though they left out BMI, I think they covered the weight issue fairly well with energy expenditure, energy intake, and exercise. They obviously covered a critical risk factor with smoking. How did they diagnose diabetes? Well, they looked at diabetes medications, self-reporting, fasting glucose greater than 126, or non-fasting glucose rate greater than 200. So as you can see, they still, like the rest of medicine, had a ton of people in there who had some growing insulin resistance, but had not had a diabetes diagnosis made yet. So what did they do with all of those? Well, they adjusted. What did they adjust for? Age, sex, whether or not they had known diabetes. Actually, they looked at education level and income level. I think those are important because they're important determinants of health. They adjusted for race, and I'll just tell you, they mention it other places on this study. It was really a biracial study. There were no Middle Eastern, little to no Middle Eastern descent gene pool. There was little or no Asian gene pool. This was white and black, or African American and Caucasian. So what did they do in terms of these characteristics? They adjusted for all of those. And what does it mean when you adjust for all of those? Well, let's just, again, very briefly go through it. Let's say you have a study of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. If there are people that have, and half your study group has diabetes, the other half has none whatsoever, not even any insulin resistance. How do you tease out knowing if diet is an issue for these groups, or if it's an issue for the diabetes group and not the other group? You adjust for it. You do the analysis in the diabetes group and you do the analysis in the other group. And that's what they did using statistical methods for all of these variables that I just talked about. Now still, at the end of the day, well, here's the concern that I have, again, about the 6 blind men and the elephant. And this is going to take a minute because I'm going to read to you what they did in terms of taking out information regarding diabetics and previous disease or risk. We did a time-varying sensitivity analysis between baseline ARIC visit 1 and visit 3. Carbohydrate intake was calculated on the basis of response from the baseline FFQ. In other words, whatever they found on 3, they still adjusted it based on what they found from the baseline. We did not update carbohydrate exposures for participants that developed heart disease, diabetes, or stroke before visit number 3 to reduce potential confounding. Again, if they didn't update it, then there's no further carb adjustment at that point. And then all of a sudden, everybody who's got heart attack, stroke, or known diabetes, the outcome of the study doesn't really tell you what about carbs for those people. We did a mean residual lifetime analysis using published methods. Again, they're going into depth, and again, it's another paragraph or two on how they had adjusted and manipulated the carb content in previous or in subsequent dietary visits. Again, I don't think that any of it was evil. I don't think any of it was intended to be evil, and I don't really think any of it was inaccurate. I still do think, however, eat to your glucometer. If you're like me, you've got insulin resistance, and something knocks your blood sugar way up over 120, that's not good. And guess what? For me, that's carbs. So I'm sticking with more of a low carb, plant-based diet. Thank you.